He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're going to break down and examine a few Sasquatch variants. Now, variants that are not just based by name, but by location. Before all of that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on your podcast player of choice, social media channels, and should you wish to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. And of course, you know the drill. We've been promoting this for the past few weeks here. We're aiming to hit that 200th episode before we go on a little bit of a hiatus for the next few months into the new year, so to speak. So like, subscribe, and follow the show, and you'll be able to keep up to date on, also see all of our old content that we've been producing over the years. There's something for everybody. We've tackled a lot of subjects, and so even though we will be on a little bit of a break, there's tons of stuff you can go into our history and our backlog and just learn everything that we've talked about. So let us begin. Now, Sasquatch, as we've discussed many a time before, has a variety of descriptions, albeit different. They still hold basic similarities when comparing ones from country to country, and of course, factoring in the different natural habitats. Now, many of these wide-ranging Sasquatch are also given different names. Some we've discussed on the show include like the wood booger, wild and hairy man, yeti, and of course, many other kinds. Recently, however, while I was doing some of my own research, I came across several new names for Sasquatch that I've never heard of. This happens a lot. It'll be 3 names pop up like, oh, that's that. And sometimes this could be a name for something we've already covered. But it's cool because lots of different local communities have names for these things, and it could be a very common experience for them, whereas it's necessarily not for the larger demographics and larger areas, larger cities. But it all varies. There's many different factors to take into account. So, in my experience doing this research, Googling or finding these alternative names can be very difficult. Something most don't actually realize or know unless, like I said, you reside in these areas in question themselves. You hear the legends, you know the names, the locals give their own resident Bigfoot something specific. In this case, it takes us to the Midnight Whistler. Now let's break down some commonly known specifics about this Bigfoot creature. It's fully nocturnal, like many of its cousins, but for reasons unknown, it's only whistling. So no whoops or repeated dialogue, vocalizations, like an actual speaking, like you hear in some very rare and eerie cases. But again, perhaps this is a vocalization of its choosing. It could very well be capable of any and all vocalizations, but maybe it's choosing to only whistle. That's me playing devil's advocate, though. While hitting the familiar, albeit a tad shorter height range for a Sasquatch, this cryptid is consistently reported as having a height of around 7 to 8 feet. Interestingly enough, now we've mentioned how Sasquatch consistently has either red eyes or yellow eyes. Reports of this creature detail green eyes. This is the first time I've come across a Bigfoot with that mention of eye color. Now, I tried to break through the veil of mystery on that and pinpoint why that is. All I could find out, and again, speculation, maybe it's a form of night vision. Alternatively, night vision trail cams can make eye shine also appear green. Of course, it depends on what kind of camera and night vision you are using, and if it's exclusively nocturnal, well, night vision for this type of creature does make sense. Now, their hair color is said to be of gray, and it's supposed to be from head to toe, completely covered. Now, they reside in the state of Kentucky in the United States of America. The state does have its own Bigfoot research organization group, similar to the BFRO that we have in North America. I'm going to recommend that any locals or even people from around the globe just go check out their website. I'm going to include a link to it down below. I had a lot of fun just kind of perusing through and exploring. It's full of reports, pictures, and even audio submissions that you can listen to. And I sent a few of those to Reuben. Very freaky stuff. And when you cross-reference it with what we've heard in the Sierra sounds, there are some very interesting subtle similarities. But again, I digress. I leave that up to you and your explorator of minds to dissect further. It's definitely an informative site to explore on all things Bigfoot. But now, the Midnight Whistler is not the only thing roaming around Kentucky. There is also the Squalling Savage. Whether or not it's the same creature remains to be seen, and I say that because of its reported physical differences. The height is notably a bit taller, with estimations at 8.5 to over 9 feet tall. Its hair is reddish brown and sometimes a dark brown, but with a bigger and bulkier build to it. There are older tales that show that these creatures and the Midnight Whistler were not friends, that they would actually get into fights. Of course, how do we know that? All I can say is legends. Where are all these specific legends coming from? Well, I did some digging and I couldn't really find anything on my end, but that doesn't dismiss that legends aren't real. It comes from somewhere. It could just be word of mouth. And we have to remember, the internet doesn't have every answer known to man. Some things are kept off the grid, you could say. But to help add a little foundation to this notion of two separate Sasquatch beings going up against each other, we're going to look at apes. And I love to do this in comparison because there's so many things that apes are doing that are popping up in reports with Sasquatch. So, the legendary Jane Goodall, she helped contribute greatly to this, and she's made several amazing discoveries. That's just me making an understatement. She was amazing. So, back in the 1970s, at the Gumbe Stream National Park in Tanzania, male chimps would actually organize themselves into warring gangs that raid each other's territory. Now, sometimes they would actually be leaving the mutilated dead bodies behind in these areas of conflict. Now, chimpanzees have also been found to patrol their territories. Now, this is conducted in usually smaller groups. Majority of them are males, and they do this to maintain territorial boundaries, scout for food resources, and monitor rival groups. On top of this, the methods they employ include vocalizations to help mark and communicate with other groups. These chimpanzees also enter a state of hypervigilance while they are on patrol. Now, I'll be damned if that isn't something that sounds strikingly similar to our Sasquatch friend. But as always, I will leave that to you to decide. Kentucky has several national parks and cave systems, most notably the Mammoth Cave National Park, which we talked about on the show before. There's certainly a rich area of land in this state to hide in, should you wish to be unseen. But before we move on to our next Bigfoot variant, I have a quick report story that I want to share with you, and I quote. Me and my brother were hunting for years. We communicated with high to low pitch whistles, so about 2 to 3 weeks ago, it was a midday near sundown. I whistled a high-pitched whistle to my brother, informing him I was leaving. The next day, I went back to the stand I was in, and the stand was nothing but splinters and broken planks of wood. I haven't been back to those woods since, and neither has my brother. End quote. The speculation here, I reckon, is that a squalling savage heard the whistles, assumed it was a midnight whistler, and tore the place up. That's me being bold and assuming. However, that's based on what we've discussed being true. Everything we've broken down is accurate. But I leave that up to your interpretation. It does not dismiss the fact that if something was out there, a bipedal Bigfoot of some kind, and they hear someone in their territory hunting, they could see that as an act of aggression. Again, we don't know. We don't have a body, so we can only speculate. My speculation is this thing was territorial, it got angry, and it responded in kind. Now, our next variant takes us to North Carolina, where it's deeply rooted in Cherokee folklore. This creature is called the Sulkaloo. Now, it shares several physical and behavioral traits with Bigfoot. Beyond that, it's thought to be able to control and read minds. Mind speak and infrasound come to mind here, but that, again, that's depending on what you believe. Now, this creature's name of Sulkaloo means that he has them slanting, and that's referring to his eyes. He is said to inhabit the top of Tennessee Bald Mountain in what is known as the modern-day North Carolina. He is the great lord of the game, and this is basically a spirit invoked prior to and during a hunt, where he's said to assist hunters in tracking their quarry. Now, I know I said the Sulkalu. His other name that he goes by is the Cherokee Devil, just to help you understand that there's multiple names that these beings will encompass, I guess. They'll take on. I don't know if that's the right word. I digress. Now, as a spirit, this giant is invisible, which is explained in a Cherokee tale that can be found in The Myths of the Cherokee by James Mooney. Now, it details how a widow lived with her daughter a long time ago, and while her daughter was of marrying age, she befriended and got very close to a mysterious stranger who would court her, bring her gifts of food. He would always leave before dawn, but one day she pleaded that he'd stay to meet her mother. He did just that, and when the mother saw him, she cried out in fear. He was a giant, he had slanted eyes, everything about him was just not okay. But he was a great hunter and provided food, so he and this lady's daughter, they married and they left. She eventually had a child with him. And it's what happens following in that tale. It's quite something. But it ultimately concludes with someone breaking their word, thus rendering the Sulkalu to be invisible to the human eye. Now, as of early 1823, Europeans started recording this tale and the creature in other sightings. Now, I do have a report that I found that we'll share. It's given the name Dog Killer. This is a more recent encounter. Now, sadly, if you aren't feeling up to it, I mean, it's not anything graphic or whatever, but if you don't like the Dog Killer is not a friendly and positive thing to say for your name. So if you want to just skip over this, you can. But I will get into it now, and I quote, "Resident Tim Peeler informed police of a bizarre encounter that occurred in the early morning hours of June 5th, 2010. Now, Peeler had told the authorities that the hairy hominid had wandered onto his property in the rural northwest part of the county. Peeler explained to the deputies that he had heard screaming and grunting sounds coming from outside his cabin, and he went out to investigate. He was fearing that something might be tormenting his dogs. What he saw was a 10-foot-tall creature with a long beard and yellowish hair near his mountain home. At this point, Peeler claimed that he grabbed a larger stick and made menacing gestures at the man-beast. The beast left, but one of Peeler's 5 dogs was not so lucky, as is indicated from the excerpt from his 911 call. I'm going to put that in here. "This beast killed one of my 5 dogs. I threw a light on it, but I could not hit it as I was very afraid. It seems like an ape with a human face. I'm going to kill him if he comes too close to me." Now, Peeler lives northwest of the town of Cassar, where there is little or no civilization between his property and the South Mountain State Park. That's one of North Carolina's least developed recreational sites. Peeler, who claimed the creature had 6 fingers on each hand, said that the Bigfoot left his abode but came back a short time later. "I rough-talked him and said, 'You get away from here.' And I said, 'Get.' And he went back down the path again." End quote. This isn't the only case either. Out of Cleveland County, there's another Bigfoot-like creature that they called the Nobby. Now, it resides here and is very well publicized. It was in the winter of 1978 and 79. There was a number of people in the area of Carpenter's Knob. Now, this is north of Kings Mountain, and they had basically come together and reported seeing a large creature with long black hair walking on 2 legs. Now, authorities deduced it was residents just seeing a black bear, a very large one, but one property owner said that one of his goats died of a broken neck, whereas newspaper stories, they took this and they started to run rampant with it, just the notion of monsters, and then they started reporting monster hunts. And now, there were large footprints that were found. However, the sightings began to die out in the spring of 1979, where we've loosely mentioned it on the show. But on my own time and research, I've come across a few claims of men in suits showing up in areas of Sasquatch activity. And while that's not at all speculated here, or even, you wouldn't even think of that reading this report, I just think it's funny when something mysterious goes completely off the grid. The Dover Demon is a great example of this. For a couple of days, it appears and terrorizes locals before vanishing and never being seen again. Now, I'm not subscribing to the idea that a Men in Black strike force went in and exterminated whatever this thing was. That would be pretty bold of me. But I also am not one to dismiss the idea of a well-funded group operating outside of the government, but do have certain supporting pillars of government to act on behalf of the public's best interests. Best interests that maybe we don't even know of. Best to keep that veil down and have our interests focused elsewhere. But that's another rabbit hole. We saw this actually with the congressional hearing regarding UAPs and UFOs. It is a quite alarming thing to think about, being a real thing out there, but I digress. Our last variant to close us out is the West Virginian Yahoo. Similar to our previously mentioned Bigfoot cousin, the Yahoo likes to make terrifyingly loud squalls. Southern legends detail that this creature will eat from residents' gardens and steal whole pigs. Now, it has a familiar description. It clocks in at around 8 feet tall, has jet black fur covering its body. Now, a lot of folks speculate that more than a few of these creatures are roaming the Appalachian area. One of their notable, or I guess less than desirable tactics is tree throwing. Back in the 1800s in central West Virginia, loggers began reporting having issues with these trees and logs being thrown at them in work sites. And it's funny because that can carry over into the Pacific Northwest here, where, again, we have a lot of logging. And I wish I could remember the source, but someone was describing how if you're out there, talk to loggers. They're on these remote areas way up in the mountains, these back logging roads, and they're working out there for long periods of time. Strike up a conversation with them and just see, hey, have you seen anything? Have you heard of anything? You never know what might come out of that conversation. And it's a good idea. It's a very good suggestion. The worst case scenario that comes out of it, you make a great friend and you have a good conversation. But the people that are in those types of work positions, like truckers, we've talked about that before. You're working in these, like I said, remote places, and you are seeing things that regular city folk are not privy to seeing. So who knows what could come from that. Our reported location here is going to take us to Clay County to close out the episode, and I quote, "One night around 7 o'clock, my employees were picking apples in the field. I went there to check on their progress, and when I came down, I saw a large black shadow at a nearby tree, and in one hand it held a branch, and in the other it was picking apples. When it saw me, it walked away without showing any fear at all. When I walked over to see if it was still in sight, I became afraid and ran. Ever since then, I've carried a gun with me. Now the next day, I returned with my son and 2 other men and saw the branch on the tree the creature was holding. It was 7'4" high, and it had to duck under it." End quote. That is a very freaky scenario, but it's those types of sightings where you aren't just completely baffled and caught off guard and in awe and mesmerized by what you are seeing, but you were noting the surrounding landscape. This person noted, okay, it was holding that branch up. He noted the height of the branch when he revisited the area and thought, okay, this thing in the first meet here that I saw, it had to duck under it to get away. And there's so many of those little things that you can take note of. And I don't ever like to just shoot someone down for having an experience because, there are logical explanations for some of these reports, but other times there are things that you can't explain, and it genuinely could be that 0.0001% of a chance that is actually something. So when you're looking at something like this, you have people that have an experience like, oh my gosh, yeah, it was big, it was hairy, it ran, oh, I saw another one here, there were 2 of them, there were 3 of them, oh my god, and it can get a little bit I don't want to say far-fetched because that comes off as negative, and I want to be very, very respectful because I feel like this topic and this community is met with a lot of negativity and a lot of criticism. So in those cases, it can be a little bit eccentric, but then you have other reports where these individuals, like I said, they see things that you normally are not going to highlight in an encounter, that you're looking for that quick cash-in to scare someone or the media fame or anything like that. You're noticing that it lifted the tree and notice that that tree branch was a certain height. So in retrospect, it's confirming the height that you were estimating that it was at. You're noticing it has 6 fingers. You're noticing that, hey, your tree blind was destroyed. maybe that's a little bit excessive too, but it's the little things that you pinpoint in these reports. Those are the things that I enjoy reading when it comes to breaking down people's encounters, because maybe there's a little bit of truth in it. But that is everything for this week's episode. Thank you for tuning into it. We will be back next week. I've been chatting with Reuben. We're looking at a couple of discussions to share with you guys pertaining to a few interesting topics, but I digress. Remember, you can find us online and reach us directly via CryptidClues@gmail.com. I am your host, Taylor, and remember everyone, take care and stay safe.